when Erin asked me if I would come talk about this, I wasn't sure exactly what you guys were looking for, what you were wanting to hear. So I'm going to offer my perspectives and also just kind of just some general thoughts on kind of transitioning out of the traditional veterinary role in the shelter and moving into more of a manager role, whether there's a variety of those. And I'd love y'all's input. For those of you, is any veterinarians in the room acting as non-clinical roles like operations? Awesome, lots of you. Okay, I'm curious to hear what those are, but we'll get on with it. So I'm starting off with the ASV Position Statement. Always got to have plugs for the Association of Shelter Vets, but I think we can all agree as a baseline, especially because you're at the ASPCA Cornell Shelter Medicine Conference, that vets need to be involved in shelters, right? So this is what this position statement is about. It's about veterinary supervision in animal shelters. And it seems obvious to us, but the reality is a lot of shelters don't fully employ, utilize, maybe don't even trust vets. It depends on the scenario. And so that's kind of an aside, but we're just leading into this is critical. That vets are not only involved in shelters, but that we continue to look at how we can elevate our impact. And sometimes that means being involved in a non-clinical way or having additional responsibilities beyond what you've been trained to do in vet school, which is what we're going to talk about today. So quick pictures of our traditional idea of roles of shelter vets. This is my buddy, Dr. Bodner, that used to work with me, and she was trying to get Amy to wear a collar, and Amy didn't want to wear a collar. So that's one of my favorites. But we're used to doing medical exams. We're used to post-op patient care. We're used to triage in barns during disasters and doing surgery with kids on your back because you have to make it work. We're used to all these things. He was, just as an aside, he was not feeling good that day, and our daycare was closed, and my other vet called out sick, so I had to come do surgery with him in my hiking backpack. But some other ways veterinarians can really be critical in the shelter environment, and I'm not going to talk about all non-clinical roles. We all know there are tons of other things, tons of other ways we can be a veterinarian and not be in a clinical position. I'm just going to focus on the ones in the shelter. So we know there are veterinarians now that are CEOs of shelters or executive directors, vets that are chief medical officers of shelters or large spay-neuter clinics, medical directors, chief vets, COOs. What others? Anybody have any that I forgot? Chancellor of University of Tennessee. Others in the shelter that y'all can think of that I'm not thinking of? Or does anybody have a weird role? Nope. Okay, so these are the big ones. And we're taking notice, but this has been a premise. Doctors as leaders has been a premise in human health care. And these were just a few when I was doing searches. I'm going to show you a few, but articles that I found online. And leadership and management for doctors has been studied in human health care, and we can embrace some of the findings from some of the articles. So encourage you, if you're moving into one of these leadership roles or considering it, that there are resources out there, but most of them apply to human physicians. But there's information out there about how big hospitals have done this, and they're finding that doctors are perfectly trained to lead because you have all of the scientific training and expertise to do so. And we're going to kind of talk about how that applies to us as shelter vets too, but there's another one. So I hear, but I'm just the vet. I went through this whole, so just to give y'all real quick how I became the COO. I started as a relief vet at the shelter just doing surgery because I wanted to get away from doing things other than surgery. I just wanted to spay neuter all day. And then quickly realized that there were other things in the shelter that I could affect, like cleaning protocols and isolation and how we moved animals through the shelter, population management, that would be better served if I at least learned what we were doing and why, and tried to bring in my training as a vet and do that respectfully. And eventually, over time, it led to me wanting to learn more about other aspects of the shelter. How do we make our budget? How do we decide who we hire? How do we manage our team? And I think I went from I'm just the vet and I just want to be the vet to I want to do more because I want to understand how we run this place and how we can do it better. And so I'd encourage y'all, if you're even toying with this idea of going beyond your clinical role in any way, whether it's just adding responsibilities or shifting to a new position, to really think about why you want to do that. And I think sometimes we get trapped in, I want to do it so I can change how this crappy place runs, right? Like you want to change some stuff, but really think about why you want to be a leader, or why people may be asking you to be a leader is another common reason. That the other people around you, your other team, your boss, the leadership of the shelter, they see something in you that they think is valuable, and trying to understand what outside of your veterinary training might be leading them to feel that way about you. So you're already a leader, whether you like it or not. I've had our vets too just say, I'm just the vet, I'm going to stay out of it. And I'm like, that's impossible in a shelter. I mean, how many of you actually get to just do spay, neuter, and medicine all day? You get asked about all kinds of crazy decisions day in and day out. And it's because you're already a leader. You're a subject matter expert. We know this. You're trained in pretty much everything, every aspect of the shelter day-to-day operations. You're a community leader. When people hear you're a vet, do they ever go, oh, that's too bad? They're like, you're so cool. I mean, I've had police pull me over and still give me a ticket, but tell me how they wanted to go to vet school. So you're a leader in the community, whether you like it or not. You're a teacher, whether you intend to be or not. You're teaching your technicians, your other staff, whether it's technical skills, or you're just showing them how to behave, how to be, how to lead by example. You might have more life experience, I guess, depending on your age and kind of what you've experienced in life. But a lot of our staff are like 20 and just moving out for mom and dad or things like that. So sometimes you're a mentor because of your maturity and what you've already gone through in life. This is a big one, but supporters really want to hear from you. Do any of you guys go to donor events for your shelter? You know what? That is funny. Y'all's hands went like this. Which is kind of how I used to feel about that too. But don't you feel like a total rock star when you're like Mick Jagger? They're like, there's Dr. Luke, and you're like, yeah, what's up? Like, because the supporters want to hear from you. They think you're so awesome. And they're really interested in what you do in the shelter and what you bring to the shelter. So really, you're set up perfectly just by your title, just by your degree and what you've gone through and the work you've done. You're set up perfectly because the people who support the shelter really are interested in what you do and what you have to say. And then I talked about this earlier in another lecture, but your presence on the team alone is major credibility for your organization. So we know there are a lot of shelters who can't afford vets or don't have the ability, there's not a vet around, or they can't find a vet that's interested in being a shelter vet or trained to be one. So you being on that team is huge. It's huge. So even if you think you're just the vet, this is where I pump you up. I'm about to tear y'all back down. So I'm just getting you warmed up. So this was also from from a Google search I did, but this is when the ASV was petitioning for the board specialty for shelter medicine. And I was just going to read this because I'm not sure. Y'all can probably read it, but although medicine and surgery play a large role in shelter medicine, shelter veterinarians must also have a thorough understanding of epidemiology, preventative medicine, infectious disease control, policy development, facility design, public health, animal behavior, and veterinary forensics. Whoa, that's a lot. And so my point with this one is you're more than just a vet, you're a shelter vet. You're like a whole new level of vet. You're MacGyvers, you're innovators. You have all this broad experience when you're in the shelter that puts you in even better of a position to be a leader for the organization than you realize. And then you might be thinking, well, why would I want to do this? I'm comfortable back there doing spay neuter, wearing pajamas to work, and I don't have to talk to anybody all day. Why would I want to do this? And I want to just give you this thought, and it's that you have responsibility for the safety and well-being of patients regardless of whether you perform non-clinical duties. So even when you're a manager, your impact is so much bigger, and not that it's not big as a shelter vet, but you have the opportunity to influence the entire organization when you take on these additional responsibilities. And remember, we all took an oath to first do no harm, and this extends across the shelter. So my opinion is if you're a shelter veterinarian in a situation where you kind of see things happening over here that maybe you don't think are okay, but you just go, I'm just here to do spay neuter, then you really need to look outside of that because you have the obligation to take care of the health and well-being regardless of your role in the shelter. And why should you do it? Well, there's a fast pace. We know there's a fast pace of change in sheltering. So shelter medicine is now a thing. I'm a little old. I'm not super old, but I'm a little old. And when I was in vet school, like there was no shelter medicine anything going on at A&M. I mean, there was a shelter, I think, shelter club. You might remember sheltering vets, and then we had some students that could do TNR. To do spay neuter surgery, but this wasn't an outcome. There was no elective, there was no class. And so it's really evolved quite a bit, and this is a cool opportunity for a new way to practice. What I enjoy about it too is you get to do so much more than be on the phone talking to clients all day explaining why they should do X, Y, Z. And it's a great opportunity for you if you have the potential to do, if you think you might buy a practice down the road or do some other kind of management. Shelter medicine is actually great preparation. I mean, you're on the front lines and doing crazy things. But there's an increasing complexity of animal welfare organizations as these shelters grow and they need more levels of management and leadership. There's a lot more opportunities for us in leadership. I think efficiency is the big one on here. And do most of you guys who are in clinical roles, you work with like a shelter manager or a DO directly day to day? How can it be frustrating sometimes when they have an idea about how something should go, and if you were both of those people combined, it might be a little simpler? It looks like that's happened before. Sorry? What'd you say? Huh? We always agree on that. I thought so. I do too. Yeah. You always agree. Right. And so sometimes just the fact that, and I'm not trying to convince you that you should go home and like apply to take over just so that you can stop fighting, but this is another perk is, you have more ability to share your education and your expertise, and it reduces the gaps and it makes things more efficient overall, right? If there is a vet in leadership in whatever capacity, you're a chief veterinarian, a medical director, you run the whole place, whatever it is, hearing your voice and your opinions on things really speeds things up because there's less, decision making that happens, and then they decide to ask you, and you go, whoa, that doesn't make any sense. That goes against everything in the shelter guidelines or whatever. So it makes everything more efficient. I mentioned before, you'll have a larger scale of impact. We're all trained in scrutinizing data, right? I learned from Dr. Slater, who's sitting down here. And so that's especially helpful in a shelter environment. To look at our data and try to figure out how to process it and how much leverage to give a certain data point. I wanted to point out this book that, I don't know, y'all can see that, I think. This is Upside Down Leadership by Don Jansen. He's a retired zoo vet, I think it was San Diego. And I read that recently, and I just thought it was interesting. He's coming from a vet's perspective, and he's mainly talking to other like zoo veterinarians, but it's it's similar. We basically work in zoos. Let's be honest, it's kind of the same thing. But I'll reference a couple things he says throughout. But he's just giving advice basically in this book about how to be a leader. It's a lot about servant leadership, but how to be a leader as a veterinarian. So check it out. Okay. General leadership stuff. We're not going to go into a whole leadership talk because you guys have probably heard all those, and there's a bunch out there, and I don't claim to be the expert on that, on what leadership is in general. But remember, it's not about your title or position. So I'm talking about titles here, and I'm saying if you're the CEO or the medical director or whatever, but just by being a doctor in the shelter, you are a leader, and you have a lot of influence whether you realize it or not. And that can go for better or for worse. Have y'all, of the vets, who does surgery? Okay, pretty much all of you. You spend a lot of time in the surgery suite or the OR with your techs, right? What kind of stuff do y'all talk about? Like all kinds of stuff that no one else should ever hear, probably. Think about those situations where maybe you're having a bad day, or personal example, the AC is out or whatever, and you're just kind of aggro today. What does that feel like for the rest of the team? Y'all notice a change? Yeah. What about if you come in the morning, and any of y'all morning people or no? I'm a morning person. Sometimes it annoys people. I can tell you are. You're all smiley, and it's not even morning. your attitude and just how you handle what's going on in the shelter really is contagious to your team. And so this is just one piece of it. But remember, it's not about your title or position. You're the leader to them. They see you as a leader, and how you embrace if there's a big case coming in and you're like, oh man, I had dinner plans, or the AC's out and you're hot and you're sick of it, or whatever's going on. You can really affect how your team handles that. And so just keep that in mind, even if you're not looking to change titles and things like that. It's not about your title, it's about you're a leader anyway, and what you do affects your team. I liked this quote from this guy, Dr. Robert Pearl. He's an MD, and he's an advocate for physician-led healthcare delivery. And so he's one that's written a lot of the articles that I was kind of popping up earlier. And he's talking about how there should be more he's talking about human healthcare, but how there should be more physicians leading hospitals, and why we're set up perfectly to do that as doctors. And so I think it's kind of the same thing. But he says being a leader is not only a responsibility, but also a privilege. And I think that's something to let resonate with us as well. And we'll kind of talk about what that could look like. But remember that it's a privilege. You have the ability to impact lots of people. Sometimes you're their first boss in the shelter, or you're the first vet they've known, or whatever. So just keep that in mind as you go back to leading when you get home. Okay, now I'm going to tear y'all down. So a little bit of honesty. We're all doctors, and I just want to say congratulations on that. Congrats on being a doctor. Now get over it. Get over yourself. So we know we're dependent on a whole team of people, but I think sometimes we forget that, and sometimes our team forgets that. Because we have a title that says, I have all the answers, I learned all this in vet school, and people are used to coming to you for all the answers and solutions. And that can be really destructive to a team environment. It can disempower your team if you don't ask them for solutions, how to solve problems. If you're just like, I'm the doctor, and here's what we're going to do. That's kind of how we're trained if you think about it, and this isn't a slam on vet schools, but in the traditional veterinary practice model, you're trained to be the expert, the boss. Someone comes in, they're asking for your expertise. You make a plan. You're like, everybody carry out the plan. And it's focused on us being the boss and being bossy and telling everybody what to do, and everybody does it, and everything turns out okay. It's a little harder in more of a team setting in the shelter environment. You're not the expert of all things. Do any vets in here run development? No. Do any of us do the accounting? No. Anybody run a capital campaign? No. HR? They don't let me in HR. You could probably see why. There's a big joke about that, but I'm like, no. So we don't have all the answers, right? And we need to recognize that. So yes, we're experts in our field, we're experts in what we're trained in, but we don't have all the answers. And that's a big step toward becoming a good leader, is realizing that it's not all about you. And yes, you're awesome and you're valuable. One of the examples I saw, I can't remember if it was, now I'm trying to remember if it was from Dr. Pearl or that book, but he talks about the example of thinking about your body and how if you're the brain in your body, can your brain operate your body without your arms or your legs or your heart or your liver, right? Like, I'm not saying that right, but your brain can't do much for your body by itself, right? Because it's dependent on all the other parts. So we need to keep that in mind as we're navigating as vets, because we are important, but we're not everything. Okay. And this is Dr. Pearl again. If you Google that title, he wrote an article on Forbes.com that I thought was interesting, and he's talking about 5 reasons why even best doctors can fail as leaders. I thought this was interesting, so I was going to go through this with y'all. The first he lists is me over we, which actually made me chuckle because my son's basketball team, before they would go out on the court, they'd go, we, not me. Like, that was like their chant, and then they go, woo, or whatever. So when I saw this, I wanted to go, woo. And that's just related to what I was just saying, is feeling like we're more important than our team somehow, or that our value is more because we're a doctor. I've been guilty of it. There have been moments where I'm like, what would they do if I left right now? You know, because you get frustrated about something, but they would find another you. So we're not any more important than any other part of the team. And also related to that me over we, this can be a pitfall if you choose to operate based on that. Like, you might think it, but then when you start doing things like everybody's going to carry the phone that gets called when the alarm goes off, the building alarm gets tripped, except me, because I'm the doctor. You have to be careful of things like that. Or I've put in my time. You guys can all do this terrible thing, and I'm going to be over here. So you have to be careful of that kind of stuff. That's a common derailer. Only my boss counts is another one. So only thinking up. And this is something I talk to our shelter managers about a lot. They both report to me, but they ultimately report up to our CEO as well. But then I tell them, you also report to your staff, right? So they report to all the supervisors. And one of them tends to be very responsive up. And then if something's going on down here, she's like, y'all are good. Like to avoid that. And the other one's completely opposite. We may not get the data or the analytics we need right away, but she's down in the trenches when the staff needs her. And I think a balance of that is perfect, is remembering that you don't only report up, you report down. Your team is really your boss as well. Not recognizing what's most important. This is about prioritizing. This can be tricky, but you guys as shelter vets honestly should be even better at this. So think about, when we're trained to be a veterinarian, we're trained to notice every detail. Everything's important. Nothing drops off the list until we've proven it's not important. But sometimes being a leader or being a shelter vet in general, you have to prioritize and you have to let some things drop off and make sure that you're focusing on what's most important. Being overwhelmed by new responsibilities, this makes sense. You're going to be taking on all kinds of different things. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And being really risk averse or having fear of failure can be a trigger. I think it's hard to be. I've decided that risk aversion is the surest way to not be able to do high volume spay neuter too. This is my newest theory. It's like, if you're scared that you're going to fail, don't do surgery. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to manage as a doctor. And first, you have to start with the desire. And this is where I just say, don't try to force a square peg into a round hole. If you don't want to change positions, you're still going to be a leader as a doctor, and you need to focus on that because, like I said, that impact is huge. You have a lot of leverage and a lot of impact on your day-to-day and how your team feels about how things are going. And we all know there's constant crisis at the shelter, so you have lots of opportunity to practice that. But if you don't want to move up into a different position or you don't want to slide over into a different role, don't force it. Sometimes people will ask you to out of desperation, this is funny because this is how I actually ended up in operations, was someone else told me to do it. So it's funny I'm telling y'all this. But we had our operations director left, and it was like it was going to be interim. But then I decided it was actually pretty fun. But I guess what I'm saying is don't try to force it, especially if you're thinking about it. And when you really honestly think about moving into a leadership position, the reasons you want to do it feel like because you want to control things or whatever. Remember, you're going to be even more obligated to the staff around you and underneath you in a leadership position, and there's going to be additional responsibilities, and it is stressful in its own way. So that's my way out if you need one. Have courage. Remember, you're perfectly educated for being a shelter leader. You have training in all the things related to the daily operation, right? So cleaning and sanitation. And yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Many times some of these roles, like operation leaders and other roles, are much less paid than veterinarians are. So how does one empower your organization to say, hey, I want to step into this role, and it's worth it for you to pay me to do this?
That's a good question. I think, sure. She was saying often that folks who lead operations are paid at a lower rate than veterinarians, even in the shelter vets too. And so how would you empower or talk with your organization to consider paying you still at that higher rate? I think it's still leveraging your credentials, but also your experience and what you bring. So it's negotiation based on your package, all the things you bring to the table. And so this is the time to kind of brag on yourself. Hopefully, if you've already been working with them, they know how valuable you are. Sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes it involves kind of combined roles. So for example, for us, we don't have a medical director underneath me, which in the future we probably would if we grow and expand, but I kind of cover that. And then also we'll sub in as like relief vet here and there when we can't find another contract vet. So sometimes it's demonstrating how your flexibility is key. But I think it's talking to them about all the things you bring to the table that we're talking about today and trying to demonstrate how that can affect the shelter. And it's not a specific answer, but okay. To me, this is one of the biggest ones, is taking responsibility for your own development. So don't assume that you're going to move into some position and everyone's going to spoon feed the information you need. So really thinking in terms of, I think having a brain shift to think as though you're the owner of the organization, or it's ultimately all up to you. And I don't mean from a stress perspective, but I mean that you're that committed to knowing all the things so that you are educated beyond your medicine training. And so whether this is seeking mentorship with other people outside of your organization, if this is training with people within your organization, but these are just some of the topics, learning about governance and finance, HR, fundraising, facility management, unfortunately becomes a part of it, volunteer management, PR, advocacy, partnerships. Is there anything y'all can think of that I haven't put on there? You're basically just becoming a sponge. You have to learn about everything about how nonprofits are, how they run, where do we get our funding, all these things that you may not have understood when you were in your role doing surgery day to day, but these are all going to affect how you make decisions and also how you lead the team and how you explain why you guys do the things you do and why you make the decisions you make. So act like an owner and be a sponge. Those are the take-homes there. Is anybody a CAWA? There's one. Sisterhood. That's y'all all know what that is. It's a certification for animal welfare administrators. And compared to taking the national boards where you have to know questions about pigs and stuff, this is a piece of cake. So y'all should all do it. But the association, the Animal Welfare Association for Animal Welfare Administrators right now isn't offering this certification because they're revamping it. But the reason I put this on here is there's what does it actually say? The content preparation. There's a reading list of books that would help prepare you for that exam. And I would just say, even if you don't plan to get that certification or don't care about that, that reading list is really helpful because it has a little bit of everything and helps guide you on other aspects of the shelter, so finance-related, development-related, things like that. So that's a good study list if you're just wanting to, just in general, understand more about how your shelter runs and how to help in other ways, how to help manage the team. This is a big one. This seems obvious, but this goes back to listening to our team, remembering we're not the expert on all things. Remember that your director of finance would probably love to teach you about how the budget is developed, probably more than you care to know, how financial decisions are made. Your development team would probably love to talk to you about how they stewardship and cultivation, fancy words for making sure your donors are happy. Your volunteers will understand what the volunteer perspective is. So everywhere around you, you have this group of people who are there to educate you and help you understand how to be a better leader and how to step outside of your veterinarian box and learn how to lead the shelter better. So listen to them. This graphic's kind of silly, but just be humble. Remember, this, like I said earlier, you're a doctor and we're really proud of you, but take off your cape. And from that book I was mentioning earlier, Upside Down Leadership, he had this quote that I liked, and he said, "Humble leaders have self-confidence, but do not project an attitude of self-importance." I think that's important for your team, and your team understanding that you don't think you're better than them because you're Dr. So-and-so is critical, because you have to be relatable, you have to be approachable, they have to feel like you're a part of the team, you're not just there dictating orders. Okay. And you're going to make mistakes. That's another thing. Just like we do in private practice, or just like we do in practice, clinical practice, we're going to make mistakes as leaders. So there are times where we make a decision and it's okay, and you just tell people, just own up to it and move on. Okay, be trustworthy. Everybody think of somebody you trust implicitly, somebody you would trust with just about anything. And then think about what the communication with them is like. Anybody want to offer up what that feels like? How is it to communicate with this person you trust completely. Safe. Y'all are quiet. I don't even know what you said, but I'm laughing. Sorry, it feels what?
I think there's a lot of communication with that person.
Right, lots of communication.
They have your back.
They got your back. Anything else? Feels easy, right? You don't really have to build up to the communication. You just trust them. You know it's okay. It's okay to mess up. This is the type of relationship we're trying to build with our team. Things get done with littler effort because you trust that they're going to do their part, right? This is what we're trying to instill. That instills confidence in your team, too, if they feel like you're trustworthy. So what are some ways that you guys try to build trust with your team? Or have thoughts about, even if it's hypothetical? Yes.
Following through on things that you're telling people to do to make it easier.
Right.
We're going to put this wrap here so that it's easier for the staff to eat collars or whatever.
Yeah.
Actually,
Follow through. That's important. We make a lot of promises during the day, and they're trusting you to do it if they need you, or get somebody to help. What else? Yeah.
I've often found staff meetings on a regular basis with food.
Food equals trust. Just kidding. Yeah.
Morning, and then, they can come freely with suggestions, and then the next time we have the meeting, we talk about that. So it just seems to work.
Yeah, that's great. Just being friendly and casual and relatable, showing appreciation, right? Yes, ma'am.
Let them do their job.
Yeah.
Private practice with veterinary technicians that were awesome, and I was not allowed in the surgery room until we went over that was being faded and cut. And God forbid, take the clippers in my hand. That didn't away from me. And he said, get out of here. That's my free job.
Right.
And so, yeah, I was very lucky.
Yeah, it sounds like that's awesome. She was just saying, let them do their job, right? Don't try to control. And we all have a little bit of control freak in us, I think. Or we probably wouldn't be vets, but that's perfect. Yeah.
I find that soliciting feedback really helps to build like a trusting relationship, especially with the technician staff. Like soliciting their feedback on not just like a case, but also on like how a specific interpersonal issue, handling interpersonal issues, like that's what we do.
That's great. Yeah, she was just saying soliciting feedback from the team. We do this a lot when we have to make medical euthanasia calls, for example, and I find it goes over really, this is just fresh on my brain because I've been talking to one of our new vets about it because she made a euthanasia call on a kitten that was not doing well, but she just said, we need to let this kitten go, and then the staff was like, but they were, they didn't talk about why and that kind of stuff, and I told her, you might make the same decision, but if you come in and just say, guys, what are y'all thinking about Penelope? Like, she kind of looks like crap to me. What do you guys think? That makes a big difference, even if in your head you already kind of know where you're thinking you're going to go. So that's great. Okay. Yes?
I was going to say, don't be an asshole when they make
Don't be an asshole when they make mistakes. I don't know what's going on with the computer right now. Did it? Okay. That's a big one. So, we tend to all go to that place of what went wrong, but be sure you're not placing blame. When something goes wrong or they make a mistake, it's important to debrief about it and talk about it, but we don't need to make them feel stupid. And sometimes even telling them that you made the same mistake or that you also were stupid is helpful, but just not being an ass and remembering that they need to trust you, that you're there, you have their back. So, cool. I'm going to move on to the next thing here. Remember just to have fun, too. This builds trust. So sometimes it's just, when you guys are in the surgery suite having your sordid conversations about all kinds of dark things, you're actually building a really strong bond with your team. And that's part of, when we have new vets start at AHS, not that we're constantly turning over vets, but when we do have new vets come, I like to tell them, like, we had a new vet start and she was, I'm not ready to go into surgery yet. And I said, I really want you in surgery as soon as possible because that's where the team is going to learn to trust you. Even if you can't, do crazy high volume right away and things like that. But it's really about spending time with them and them seeing that you're human and that you're relatable and that you're trustworthy and that you can have fun and you can laugh, right? So this is just our silly Halloween costume contest. Okay, clarifying roles I think is important. And this is important regardless of your role in the shelter. I think as a vet, this comes up no matter what. And this was a struggle for me in the first years when I was at the shelter, was deciding who made the calls on what, who did I need to talk to, when did I need permission for XYZ. So this is important to talk through, especially if you're newer or you have a change in who you work with directly. But I think this is kind of critical no matter what, is who ultimately decides on things. These are just examples, but things like euthanasia calls, who decides on HR decisions for the medical team. Do the technicians report to you, or do they report to a supervisor that you don't have authority over, and then you're frustrated because she's not handling them the way that you want them handled, for example? Not that that's happened, I just, that's caused problems. Who manages the budget, and does that affect how you manage your cases? Which it will. And so really it's deciding, are you the deciding factor, or are you an advisor on this situation? I think as vets, we're used to, in the typical model, like private practice model, we're the decider, right? Or you're advising the client, but you're deciding on the plan. And in the shelter, whether you're just in your veterinary role or if you're doing other leadership roles, you really become more of an advisor, I think. Kind of like what we were talking about with that euthanasia call. You're summarizing what your findings are. You need to explain it in a way that's understandable, interpreting and trying to let people, the rest of your team, help you make decisions. And I think that's important, especially as a vet. I think you can, when you're still in the clinical role, you can act in that decider role a little more definitively, but if you move more into management, I think you need to become even more of an advisor. To let your team do their job, like she was saying. Get out of your own way. So we talked about not having all the answers, but also expecting solutions from your team. I heard an example, I think this was in that book too. I'm sorry, I'm like super forgetful, so I can't remember sometimes where. I think it was in the Upside Down Leadership book, where he was given an example of what if the CEO of an automotive company who used to work on the assembly line, worked his way up, and he became the CEO, but he was the only person who could install doors on the assembly line, but he's now the CEO. You can see the problem with that, right? And that makes sense to me as a vet. Sometimes we want to maintain our importance in the organization, or like want to retain the pieces of the veterinary part, the clinical part that we really loved. So we're like, no, I still need to do that thing because I love that. And meanwhile, the team is all waiting on you. Because you have other responsibilities now. So make sure that you're not clogging up the wheel, just, and get out of your own way, depending on your team, and don't push for control. I think this one, I keep meaning to frame this and put this on my wall, but this is something I'm working on at work, is thinking about how your job is not just about your outcomes at work and the metrics you affect and the animals you save, but really it's about growing your team and the people who look up to you and trust you and are working for you or around you. So it says leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that this impact lasts in your absence. Does anybody feel like everything hits the fan when you're out of town? Yeah. You said no, that's good. So that our goal should be that it doesn't hit the fan when we're out of town. I mean, stuff will still happen. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're in shelters, so things go wrong. But our goal is working towards having a team that can carry on when we're not there, right? And that's a big piece of leadership, is your responsibility to them is to grow them so they can ultimately do all the things you can do, and you're not irreplaceable. I don't mean that from a lazy perspective. You still do your job, but you're growing them, and that becomes an opportunity for them too. And this is just a little plug at the end. This is an ASPCA Pro webinar. Can y'all see that? That's coming up in August that I thought would be really applicable. It's Leadership as a Practice, Why You Don't Need Authority to Lead. BJ Rogers from Mance Pet's doing it. I know they have a table out there too, but through ASPCA Pro. So I'd sign up for that if I were y'all. that's my email if I can help y'all with anything. So, cool. Thanks, y'all.